If you came to me and said you've got 5 years until retirement, the first thing I'd ask is not how much you've saved or what you're invested in. I'd ask if you actually tested whether your plan works in the real world, or are you just hoping? Most people spend more time planning a 2-week vacation than they spend planning a 30-year retirement. They've got some vague sense that if they save enough, everything will work out. They might have run a calculator online that told them they need $1 million or $2 million or whatever number, but they've never really stress tested it. They've never asked what happens if the market crashes the year they retire, or if healthcare costs more than they expect, or if they live to 95 instead of 85. 5 years out is when you need to get serious about these questions. Not in a panicked way, but in a clear-eyed, honest way. You've still got time to adjust if things aren't on track, but not unlimited time. If you discover major problems at 64, your options are much more limited than if you discover them at 60. So here's what I'd do if I were 5 years from retirement. Not what I'd tell someone else to do, because everyone's situation is different and you should work with a professional who understands your specific circumstances. But what I do myself, first thing, I'd get brutally honest about expenses. Not what I think I'll spend in retirement, but what I actually spend now. I'd go through 12 months of credit card statements and bank records and add up every dollar, every single one. Housing, food, insurance, utilities, car expenses, entertainment, gifts, travel, everything. This is painful because you usually discover you're spending more than you thought. People tell themselves they spend $70,000 a year and then they add it up and it's $95,000. That's a big difference when you're trying to figure out if you can retire. I knew a couple who did this exercise. They were convinced they were spending about $6,000 a month. They did the detailed analysis and discovered it was actually closer to $8,500. That extra $2,500 monthly, $30,000 annually, meant they needed about $750,000 more in savings to support their retirement at a safe withdrawal rate. They weren't catastrophically off track, but they needed to adjust their plans significantly. Once you know what you actually spend, then you can start thinking about what changes in retirement. Some things go down. You're not saving for retirement anymore, obviously. You might not have commuting costs or work clothes or lunches out. Your mortgage might be paid off or close to it. If you've got kids, maybe they're finally financially independent. But other things go up. Healthcare before Medicare is expensive. Even after Medicare, there are premiums and copays and drugs. You've got more time, so you might travel more or take up expensive hobbies. Home maintenance doesn't stop just because you retired. Your car will eventually need replacing. What I do is create two budgets. One is the lean budget, the absolute minimum I could live on if I had to. Just essentials, no luxuries. The number where if things went wrong, I could still survive. The other is the comfortable budget, the amount that lets me live the retirement I've envisioned. Travel, dinners out, helping the grandkids, whatever matters to me. The gap between those two numbers is important because it tells you how much flexibility you have. If your lean budget is $45,000 and your comfortable budget is $48,000, you don't have much room to adjust if the market drops. But if your lean budget is $45,000 and your comfortable budget is $70,000, you've got $25,000 of discretionary spending you can cut if needed. That flexibility is valuable in the early years of retirement when sequence of returns risk is highest. If you retire and the market immediately drops, the ability to cut spending temporarily can save your retirement. You're not forced to sell stocks at depressed prices to maintain your lifestyle. You tighten up for a year or two, let the market recover, then resume normal spending. Second thing I do is look hard at my current asset allocation and whether it makes sense for someone 5 years from retirement. A lot of people set up their allocation years ago and never adjusted it. They were 70% stocks at 40, and they're still 70% stocks at 60, even though their situation has completely changed. Here's how I'd think about it. I'd divide my portfolio into different time buckets. Money I'll need in the next 2 years goes into cash. Completely stable, no volatility, just sitting there ready when I need it. Money I'll need in years 3 through 7 goes into bonds or very conservative investments. And everything else, money I won't touch for at least 8 years, stays in stocks. The exact percentages depend on how much I have total, but let's say I'm planning to spend $50,000 a year in retirement. I'd want $100,000 in pure cash, enough for 2 years. I'd want another $250,000 or so in bonds, covering years 3 through 7. Everything else can stay in stocks growing for the long term. Why this structure? Because it means I never have to sell stocks at a bad time. If I retire and the market crashes, I don't care. I've got 7 years of spending covered in stable assets. I can wait out any realistic downturn without touching my stock holdings. By the time I need to replenish my cash and bond buckets from stocks, the market has almost certainly recovered. I watched someone ignore this structure and pay dearly for it. He retired with about $1 million, stayed about 80% in stocks, kept maybe 3 months of expenses in cash. The market dropped 30% in his first year of retirement. He needed his $50,000 to live on, didn't have enough cash, so he was selling stocks throughout the downturn. 5 years later, his portfolio was down to about $550,000. The combination of withdrawals and poor timing had cut it nearly in half. If he'd had proper cash reserves, he'd probably still have close to $900,000. Third thing I'd do is get very clear on my income sources in retirement. Social Security is the big one for most people. What will my benefit actually be? Not what I hope it will be or what seems about right, but the actual number from my Social Security statement. When do I plan to claim it? The difference between claiming at 62 versus 70 is substantial, about 76% higher monthly benefit if you delay the full 8 years. I'd run different scenarios. What if I claim at 62 at my full retirement age at 70? What does each choice mean for my cash flow and for how much I need to withdraw from my portfolio? There's no universally right answer. It depends on your health, your other income sources, your need for the money, but you should make the decision consciously, not just claim at 62, because you can. Then look at other income. Do I have a pension? How much and when does it start? Do I have rental income? Am I planning to do any part-time work in early retirement? All of this reduces how much I need to withdraw from my portfolio, which means my portfolio can last longer, or I need less saved to begin with. I knew a man who did this analysis and realized his pension and Social Security would cover about 70% of his comfortable budget. That meant he only needed his portfolio to generate $15,000 to $20,000 a year, maybe 2% of his balance. That revelation changed everything. He could be much more conservative with his investments because he didn't need much growth. He could retire earlier than he thought because his portfolio didn't need to be as large. Fourth thing, and this is where I'd spend real money on professional help, is to look at my tax situation and whether I can optimize it before retirement. The 5 years before retirement are often your highest earning years. You're at the peak of your career. Maybe you got a big salary, bonuses. Maybe you're in a high tax bracket. But after retirement, your income usually drops significantly. You're living off savings and Social Security instead of a salary. Your tax bracket might go way down. This creates an opportunity for strategic planning with retirement accounts. If you've got money in traditional IRAs or 401k accounts, you got a tax deduction when you contributed, but you'll pay taxes when you withdraw. If you're in a high bracket now and expect to be in a low bracket in retirement, that's fine. The strategy worked. But if you think tax rates might go up, or if you'll have other income in retirement that keeps you in a higher bracket, you might want to do Roth conversions. A Roth conversion means you move money from a traditional retirement account to a Roth, paying taxes now, but ensuring that money grows and comes out tax-free forever. The question is when to do it. Sometimes it makes sense to do it in those years between retirement and when required minimum distributions start at 73. Your income is lower, so the conversion doesn't push you into a super high bracket. But sometimes it makes sense to do it before retirement if you've got room in your current bracket. Maybe you're solidly in the middle of the 22% bracket and you can convert some money without pushing into the 24% bracket. That's worth considering. This gets complicated fast, which is why I'd pay for good tax advice here. The potential savings over a retirement can easily be 6 figures if you get this right. I knew someone who worked with a CPA to do strategic Roth conversions in her late 50s and early 60s. She converted about $40,000 a year for 5 years, paying probably $50,000 total in taxes. But that $200,000 in her Roth will never be taxed again. Over a 30-year retirement, she probably saved $150,000 or more in taxes she would have otherwise paid. That's a tremendous return on the $5,000. She paid the CPA. Fifth thing I do is make sure I'm on track with healthcare planning. This is huge, and most people underestimate it. If you retire before 65, you need to figure out how you'll get health insurance until Medicare kicks in. If you retire at 60, that's 5 years of private insurance. which can easily cost $15,000 to $20,000 a year or more, depending on where you live and what coverage you need. Some people plan to retire early without really accounting for this cost. They figure they'll spend $50,000 a year, but they forgot that health insurance is going to be another $18,000 on top of that. Suddenly their plan doesn't work. Even after 65 with Medicare, there are costs. Medicare Part B has premiums around $2,000 a year for most people, more if your income is high. You'll want a supplement or Medicare Advantage plan, more premiums. Prescription drug coverage, more premiums. And even with all that, you're still paying copays and deductibles. A realistic estimate for healthcare and retirement is probably $10,000 to $15,000 a year for a couple, maybe more if you've got ongoing health issues. That needs to be in your budget explicitly, not just lumped into some general expenses category where it gets overlooked. I'd also think about long-term care. What happens if I need assisted living or nursing home care at 85? Medicare doesn't cover long-term custodial care. Medicaid does, but only after you've spent down most of your assets. A year in a nursing home can easily cost $100,000 or more. Some people buy long-term care insurance for this. Some people plan to self-insure, saving enough that they could cover several years of care if needed. Some people plan to rely on family or Medicaid. There's no right answer, but you should have some answer. Ignoring it and hoping you never need care is not a plan. Sixth thing I do is look at my debt situation. Do I still have a mortgage, car loans, credit cards, student loans from helping kids? The ideal is to enter retirement with no debt other than maybe a small mortgage at a low rate. Every monthly payment you have is money you need to withdraw from your portfolio or cover from Social Security. If I've got 5 years, that might be enough time to pay off a car or knock out some credit card balances. I'd prioritize high interest debt first. Anything over 5 or 6% that's costing me more than I'm likely to earn safely on investments. Lower interest debt like a 3% mortgage. That's more debatable. Depends on my overall situation and psychology. I knew a couple who made a big push in their final 5 years of work to pay off their mortgage. They put every bonus, every tax refund, cut back on spending, got it done. When they retired, their monthly expenses dropped by $2,200 immediately. That meant they needed about $650,000 less in retirement savings to support the same lifestyle. The 5 years of aggressive payoff bought them enormous flexibility in retirement. Seventh thing is to think about where I'm going to live. Am I staying in my current house, downsizing, moving to a different state? This matters because housing is usually your biggest expense, and changes here can dramatically affect your retirement math. If I've got a 4-bedroom house and the kids are long gone, do I really need all this space? Could I downsize to something smaller and cheaper and free up a couple $100,000 from my portfolio? The smaller house would also have lower property taxes, insurance, utilities, maintenance. That might save $15,000 or $20,000 a year in expenses. Or maybe I'm in a high-tax state like California or New York, and I'm thinking about moving to Florida or Texas or Nevada where there's no state income tax. On a $80,000 retirement income that could save me $5,000 or $6,000 a year in state taxes, over a 30-year retirement, that's approaching $200,000. These are big decisions, not something you want to rush into without thinking through all the implications. But 5 years out is when you should be exploring the options, running the numbers, maybe visiting places you're considering, talking to people who've made similar moves. I watched someone do this brilliantly. She was living in an expensive suburb of Boston, 3-bedroom house worth about $700,000, property taxes of $9,000 a year. She was planning to retire at 65 with about $1 million in savings. She ran the numbers and realized she'd be cutting it close. So at 60, she started planning a move. She spent 5 years visiting different areas, talking to people, understanding the trade-offs. At 65, she sold the Boston house, bought a smaller place in North Carolina for $300,000, put the $400,000 difference into her portfolio. Her property taxes dropped to $2,500 a year, no state income tax on her retirement income, saving her another $4,000 a year. The combination added maybe $700,000 to her effective net worth and made her retirement much more secure. Eighth thing I do is make sure my estate planning is current. Do I have a will? Is it updated? Do I have powers of attorney for healthcare and finances? Does someone I trust know where all my accounts are and how to access them if something happens to me? This isn't fun to think about, but it's necessary. And 5 years before retirement is a natural time to review it all. Your situation has probably changed since you last looked at this. Maybe your kids are older. Maybe you've got grandkids now. Maybe your assets have grown substantially. Does your old will still reflect your current wishes? I'd also think about beneficiaries on retirement accounts and life insurance. Are they current? I've seen cases where someone's retirement account still listed an ex-spouse from 20 years ago as beneficiary because they never updated it, or it listed their parents who passed away. You want to make sure this is right. Ninth thing, and this might sound odd, but I'd work on the psychological transition. Retirement isn't just a financial change, it's a massive life change. You're going from a structured existence where you know what you're doing Monday through Friday to having no structure at all. And for some people, that's liberating. For others, it's disorienting. What am I going to do with my time? How will I stay engaged and find meaning? Who will I interact with socially if most of my social connections are through work? These aren't financial questions, but they affect your retirement success as much as having enough money. I'd spend some time in these 5 years thinking about what I actually want retirement to look like, not in a vague I'll relax and travel way, but specifically, what does a typical week look like? What am I doing Tuesday morning at 10? If the answer is, I don't know, watching TV, I guess that might not be sustainable for 30 years. I knew a man who retired after 40 years at the same company. He'd saved plenty, the finances were fine, but he'd never thought about what he'd do with his time. 6 months into retirement, he was bored and depressed. He'd played golf twice a week for about 3 months until that got old. He'd traveled a bit, but mostly he sat around the house watching cable news and getting more agitated. His wife was still working. His friends were working. He felt disconnected and purposeless. Eventually, he found his way, started volunteering, got involved in some community projects, figured it out. But he could have saved himself a year of unhappiness if he thought through the transition more carefully. The last thing I do is have a conversation with my spouse, if I have one, making sure we're aligned on all of this. When are we retiring? Are we retiring at the same time or different times? What does our retirement lifestyle look like? How much are we planning to spend? What are our priorities? I've seen couples get into retirement and discover they had completely different expectations. One person thought they'd be traveling constantly. The other thought they'd be staying home, enjoying a quiet life. One person thought they'd help the kids financially whenever needed. The other thought the kids were on their own. These misalignments can create serious conflict. Better to have these conversations now, 5 years out, when you've still got time to adjust and align. Talk about the money, yes, but also talk about the life. What do we each want retirement to look like? Can we create a vision that works for both of us? All of this, all 10 things, they're really about the same idea. Take the abstract concept of retirement and make it concrete. Turn it from a vague someday into a specific plan with actual numbers and actions and decisions. 5 years is the perfect window for this. You're close enough that it's real and urgent, but far enough away that you can still make significant adjustments if needed. If you're 5 years out and you do this work and discover you're not on track, that's not a disaster. That's information you can act on. Maybe you work a couple more years. Maybe you adjust your lifestyle expectations. Maybe you make some bigger changes like selling the house or moving somewhere cheaper. You've got options. But if you wait until you're 64 to discover you needed another $300,000 in savings, your options are much more limited. That's what I'd want to avoid. So that's what I do. Get brutally honest about expenses. Fix my asset allocation for someone about to retire. Understand my income sources and when to claim them. Optimize my tax situation while I still can. Plan for healthcare costs. Deal with any debt. Think about where I'll live. Update my estate plan. Prepare psychologically for the transition and make sure my spouse and I are aligned on all of it. None of this is glamorous. It's not about picking winning stocks or timing the market or any of that. It's just careful, detailed planning. But that planning is what separates the people who have comfortable, secure retirements from the people who struggle and worry. And the best time to do that planning is right now, 5 years before you need it.